Hi, folks. Um, in the chess world, yesterday marked the 65th birthday of the 12th world champion Anatoly Karpov. Um, he had to play three matches in the candidates event for the right to play Bobby Fischer, but we famously know that Fischer decided not to defend his title. Um, but the candidates event that year is highly regarded as one of the most competitive um, in candidates history. He had to play Lev Polyugayevsky, he had to play Boris Spassky, and also in the final Viktor Korchnoi. Now, in 1971, Bobby Fischer played 21 games in his candidates event. Boris Spassky played 29 games in 1965 and then 26 in 1968, but in this one, Karpov had to play 43 matches, which certainly gave credence to his legitimacy as the new world champion, as if it was in any doubt. But to celebrate, I'm going to have a look at one of his games. This is game two from his final with Viktor Korchnoi. The first game had ended in a draw, but after e4, c5, and if we know anything about the Sicilian, um, we get an idea that it's probably going to be a bit more decisive than the first match. So we get knight f3, d6, and if you're familiar with it, the next moves are pretty standard. Knight f6, knight c3, and we get g6, which is a dragon variation and a pet of Viktor Korchnoi's. He was quite fond of this. Karpov plays bishop e3, we get bishop g7, and Karpov plays f3, and in some variations, this is it's an all-purpose move. It strengthens e4. But also, in some variations, if white plays queen d2, it stops the knight jumping into g4 to try and evict this bishop, because this queen bishop battery into h6 is going to be one of white's trump cards in most variations. So it's an all-purpose move. Black plays knight c6, we get the queen d2, black castles kingside, and we get bishop c4. Now this is a Yugoslav attack, and in its spirit, the aim is, well, white's going to castle queenside, and this is where some of the most interesting variations arise. Logically, and in a nutshell, the player who blows the opposite king defence apart first will likely take the spoils. In contrast to most openings, the sharpness the Yugoslav kind of ensures that, just one mistake from either end could easily result in defeat. But we get the most common reply, which is bishop d7. And at first sight, you could be forgiven for wondering what all the jazz is about. How can such chaos arise? From here, but the majority of the variations that can arise from here are indeed very complicated. The possibilities are endless, and even for the more experienced players, even Viktor Korchnoi, as it turns out now, calculations can be very awkward. I grew up as a Kasparov fan, and I became quite partial to the accelerated dragon. And the accelerated black's aim is to try and get d5 in one go rather than d6, d5, which is always a purpose in the Sicilian, is to liberate with d5 eventually. The idea of trying to save a tempo is a tempo gained, trying to attack the white king, and the same goes for white as well. Sometimes bishop c4 is delayed. You might just get the castle to try and gain that tempo to attack the black king as well. And I don't know how many times over the years I've heard that the dragon's been refuted, that it's no use as an opening, and that's okay to say, if someone's extensively analysing it with an engine and then going, oh look, it's refuted. But in the heat of battle, as a lone soul, one fortunate novelty is enough to kind of, give either side the win, because there's just so much happening. Here we get h4, setting up an attack immediately on the black king, and black responds with rook c8, which also starts to add pressure on the c file. This bishop is unprotected to discoveries. If knight takes knight, queen takes knight, then the queen's walking into undiscoveries on the bishop g7 as well. So white plays bishop b3, and we get knight e5. White eventually castles queenside, and then we have knight c4, which is hitting the queen and the bishop, which is still this force on this diagonal to the h6. And to keep this alive, black is kind of forced to give up his good bishop, which has its own indirect threat to the king as well. And with this attack ongoing, this can become far more powerful. But here he's forced to exchange. Rook takes c4, and we get h5, which is a nice little move. White is sacrificing a pawn for the attack now, and Victor, he was quite a strong believer in his defensive qualities, so he was also known for accepting positional sacrifices with great pleasure, and he does so here. We get knight takes h5, so now we get a tempo hit to play g4, knight goes back to f6, and then knight bd2, and black plays queen a5, which sends another piece over to the white king side, or where the white is castled to, and it also defends against the immediate threat of e5. Let's say black hadn't played that. Let's say he plays rook e8, because this is also still quite a potent threat, bishop h6, and the queen coming into h6. I mean, this looks pretty devastating. But so say we got rook e8. If we played e5, let's say pawn takes e5 first, and then we can play g5, which hits both the knight and the bishop. So black is effectively losing a piece here. An interesting line after rook e8, e5 would have been knight takes g4, pawn takes g4, bishop takes g4, and it's very hard to evaluate if black is getting enough compensation for the piece. He does have 3 pawns for it, but with the routes to the king side so open, it mightn't be enough, which is probably why Victor has chosen queen a5. So we get bishop h6, bishop takes, and the queen takes. Now, there may have been some practical chances giving up the rook. Let's say bishop h8, bishop takes, king takes. I'm not sure. I mean, against Karpov, it's theoretically still a lost position, really, isn't it? And against Karpov, you're just worse all the time. It has to be said. So queen takes h6, and then we get rook f to c8, and now there's pressure. Black's putting pressure on this c2 pawn. White would love to try and get this knight into the attack, but at the moment it can't because of this battery on the c file. But white plays a lovely move here, and it's rook d3. Basically what it's doing is it's forcing, well, it's giving black 2 choices. Black can either enter an unfavourable inferior endgame, or he can play what he plays, which is rook 4 to c5. The unfavourable endgame would have arisen from, we'll say, rook d3, queen d8 maybe. If the queen d8 would have g5, hitting the knight, knight to h5, knight to f4, queen to f8, queen takes queen, king takes queen, knight takes h5, g takes h5, and I think you would rather be white here going into this endgame. He's got far more space, arguably better piece activity. This might have been, Korchnoi might have been able to force a draw from here, but you would much rather be white. But anyway, he plays rook 4 to c5, and we get g5, and it's obviously it's a very logical move. It's a way of white finds a way to get his knight and c3 into the match to start attacking the king side. This diverts this rook so it can move. So rook takes g5 and then rook d5. The exchange here is unavoidable, and now it does let this knight get into the match with kind of decisive effect. We have rook takes d5, knight takes d5, in e7, rook e8, and we get knight e to f4. The idea being that after knight takes, the knight in f4 can now jump into d5 as well, just adding extra potency to it. We get bishop c6, and then again another brilliant move from Karpov here, e5. Now Korchnoi plays bishop takes d5, but let's have a look. If the pawn takes it, we then have knight takes f6 check, e takes f6, and then knight h5, and we're threatening mate on g7. If the pawn takes, we've got rook g1 check, king h8, queen g7, completely forced. Sorry, I had to let my cat out there. So we had bishop takes, so after e5 you get bishop takes d5, e takes f6, pawn takes f6, queen takes h7 check, king f8, queen h8, and black resigns from this position. The reason is he's only got king e7, but after knight takes d5, queen takes d5, rook e1 check, after the king moves, this rook is dropping, and the only other way to defend it is queen e5. But after queen e5 we have queen h4, which now the rook is protected, the queen is pinned, and it's a completely lost position. So a beautiful game from Karpov, very attacking, and I haven't looked at any of the other matches in this final, but it'd be interesting to see if Korchnoi played the dragon after this, and I will be looking into that and hopefully do some more videos. I've done this so I maybe get something out of it, but if you get something out of it as well, then even better. Thanks for watching.